Hi, it's a privilege to be with you today at this amazing conference. I really enjoyed some of the sessions today, and I hope you have a good time. As one of the last session, I think the last two more sessions, I will be tackling a really boring subject. So hopefully I will not get you too bored. It's about documentation, and honestly, is there anyone who loves it? Probably I can't find anyone, and I don't know anyone in my team, in the teams that I used to work with, anyone who truly loved the documentation. However, I will try to do a small twist about the documentation, and I will try to convince you that the documentation can be fun. And if you will use it in the different way, it can be challenging, it could be rewarding, and it could be a fun. At least the whole process of creating this thing will give you enjoy. What you can expect today when we're discussing about the living documentation, we will need to tackle the problems from the different perspectives, different angles, so that at the end, combined all together, will make a perfect dish. And these perspectives that I will be talking about and I will describing today in the random order are the architecture, documentation, testing, conventions, fitness functions, sometimes even inspections and automation. And hopefully those subjects will then at the end create something that we will be calling living documentation as the code. We will see. Hopefully we'll get that with the sessions. My name is Jakub Gutkowski, and I'm Mambovian. I'm working as the principal engineer at Mambo, and I'm helping developers teams to gain autonomy by removing the blockage, whatever the blockage is. So it could be a process, it could be a tool, it could be a guide, a missing guidance, or the practice. And I'm also trying to connect dots between the teams. So if the team is using, for instance, this team is using Kafka and this is using RabbitMQ, maybe it's better to use Kafka or RabbitMQ, depending on the situation, of course. So in my free time, I'm helping others and I'm sharing my things that I've learned during my work or during the consultancy at the conference, at the workshops, at the blog posts. And from those activities, I was rewarded multiple times by Microsoft MVP title. And you can reach me at Twitter, at Google, at Google, at Gutek handle, and you can read my mostly Polish blog at blog.gutek.pl. So if you have any questions regarding this presentation or any subject regarding the Mambo, you can always go and ask me. I'm here to help. Okay, so how is with the documentation? What's wrong with it? Is there anything wrong? Honestly, it's a really hard question. And when you ask someone about the documentation, there is a big chance you will the first reaction saying, documentation? My code is my documentation. My tests are my documentation. And these things are true, but sometimes you want something more than the code and the unit test. And then you are ending up in the graveyard of the name SharePoint or Confluence or Wiki pages. And someone is saying, it's up there. And basically, I think there's even a joke saying that if someone is saying that it's on the intranet, that means it's go yourself, yes, out. But sometimes you are lucky. And if you are lucky, that means you found that documentation. It's only 300 megabytes Word document that contains a source code, contains diagrams, contains different page orientation, and going through it, it's hard. Finding something, it's hard. And even opening the documentation is hard. If you have been using Visual Studio in your life, so you know that it used to open in 1 second. Right now, it's taking 2 to 5 minutes to open. Now try and imagine opening a Word document that weighs 300 megabytes on your 2002 computer, or even right now. It's taking even longer than the Visual Studio to open the solution. Jokes aside, but I've been there and I've done that. I had my biggest documentation created in the single file was 1,000 something pages, and that was my bachelor thesis. Where we created that with the team, but we had a big problem even printing this out and doing whatever else, searching and updating it. That was a nightmare. But we still were lucky. We had the documentation. It was hard to read, how to find anything, but we had the documentation. Because mostly you will not be that lucky. documentation will not exist. It will be outdated, or it will not provide the information you are looking for. That's the worst thing, that you are opening the document. It's 300 pages. You're going through and you can't find the information that you are looking, like how to deploy this application, what endpoints this application expose, and you're missing that information. Basically, it was a snapshot of the code at the beginning of the development, and someone decided, okay, we need documentation at the beginning. He created something, and that's it. And that's it, what you can expect. So honestly, what's the problem? And this is a really good question and really hard to answer it. But I think that one biggest problem is that developers hate spending time writing documentation, because they can spend time creating software, creating future, having fun with their own code, creating something that will make sense, not something that will go outdated the moment they've created. Not to mention that writing the code is, whenever you leave your keyboard, it's the legacy code. It's almost the same with the documentation. So it is sad, but it's true, and it hurts. And I think this is something that is going on through many years already. And we didn't address that need or that particular problem fast enough in the past. So developers don't like, and I personally, as the developer, I didn't like to write documentation. That was boring. That was tedious job, taking me away from my precious, amazing code that I was creating. And I normally, when I was doing this, I was taking my code, looking at the code and trying to describe it. And in the worst case, I think that one of my friends took the code and just add the space between the name of the classes and remove the classes with some wording. But basically it was copy paste of the code that was existing with string replace option in the word, and that's it. And that wasn't really helpful, but it was that. And when there was a code change, someone forgot to update it, and there was like a snapshot of the past. And the problem, I think, is that because of those years of the documentation that we see as we see it right now, we understand that when we're saying documentation, we see there's a big ball of mud, honestly, that never is updated. It's the information inside is misleading, like, oh, there is a method returning void, but instead it's returning int that was mentioned at the beginning. Or this module is generating pizza, but it's clearly is creating tomatoes, chopped tomatoes. So those problems exist, and that's how we see it. And this is the thing that it's versus what we think the documentation is and what documentation actually is or should be. And basically, I think we should concentrate on that part, should be, because what we think it is a big ball of mud, it's outdated, it contains misleading information, it's somewhere over the intranet. If you can find it, good for you, but don't expect it to be updated. And I don't expect to have it something more than information about the classes that were created during the development of the software, or maybe not development, but at the snapshot of the specific source code at the specific date and time. Whereas the documentation, and this will be a bit longer, so bear with me. Whereas the documentation, what it should be, or what it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be a source of some sort of the knowledge of the information that will help us to make educated decision about the future steps of the things that we want to do. Documentation is something that if after 2 years we're coming back to the software, we understand how it works, why it works the way it works, and it helps us to improve it or add extra functionality to it. Like I had the case last year that there was someone saying, how to add this query parameter to this software that I wrote years ago. And I was like, it's easy, just open the Visual Studio and you will see the code, and it's probably changing some of the parameters. And then I'm opening this Visual Studio and I'm looking at the code and I'm saying, oh no, okay, sorry, you can't do it. But I needed to open, I needed to read, I need to understand. I spent the time instead of just giving the documentation and helping with easing the process. It helps with onboarding. That's one of the things that probably no one thinks about documentation. onboarding. What's onboarding? Onboarding is taking a new hire into the team and letting him and teaching him how the team works, how the software works, what that we're creating, and how it's supposed to work and why it's working the way it's working. And without the documentation, there is always a guy who's answering all the questions. And probably this one single guy knows everything about the software. And if he will go or he will be injured, then who will know? Who will answer those questions? And why do we need to spend time, honestly, all the time answering the questions when we can, simple said, it's here, it's written, you can take a look. If you have questions, please come back and I will explain. It's much better than, okay, let's sit down and let's do it. And the onboarding process, it's taking time from the developers. And again, the developers love to sit down and write code, not documentation. It's the answer documentation. It's supposed to be, or that's how it, at least I see it, should be the answer of the question, like why software, why the product is created the way it is, how it's working and how it's done. So why is really important in here, and we will be concentrating on the why later on as well. But it's also the place, documentation, that we coming to learn about the critical available information about the system. Like if we know that the people will be interacting with our system somehow, so there should be some sort of information on what endpoints they can expect to be available or how to use those endpoints, and not saying, oh, here are unit tests of the controller class, so you can see by yourself. That doesn't work. Documentation should be a part of code. So it should be near the code, and documentation should help, should somehow extract the information from the code, so helping creating the documentation that it's up to date and it's relevant to the information, to the current state of the source code. And what's more importantly, it should be the place that it's like documentation with the source code should be a place of source of truth, meaning that whenever we are moving forward, we are not creating a copy of the documentation to have it on the wiki page. So we have a code and creating a copy of the code in the Word format, so it's hosted on the documentation. But from that source, we can generate what it's needed from the different locations. So we know that with the source of the truth, we can always click get it, and it will be there. It will not need us to update those information in different places all the time. So whenever the code change, we're going opening the document and fixing the documentation. So with all that said, I think there are a few fallacies of the documentation that I see, and I found that many teams are doing this. And when I'm talking about the fallacies of the documentation, I can easily say the fallacies of unit testing as well, because they are really similar. And the information that I'm getting, or the questions that I was getting, were just almost like I was saying, it's like with the unit test. So I will write documentation later. That's the first fallacy. And that doesn't work. And we know that doesn't work. That doesn't work with the unit test as well. We can't write the unit test after we wrote the code because we not want to do it. And it's quite boring and tedious job. And what we're doing when we're doing this tedious job, we normally checking only the happy path or the path that we wrote. And we want to validate that what we wrote there, created in the code, is what we supposed to what we're supposed to have. And this is not how the unit test should work. Yes, it's not testing that what we write is okay, but it's helping us to write the correct code. And what it does also, it's extracting the documentation out as the separate step in the process of developing the software. So if looking at the waterfall, we have a specification. We got the requirements. We are writing the code. We are executing the test, and then we writing the documentation. And how much there will be about this system in the documentation? Probably none or nothing, or almost little. So I would say that the synonymous to later is never, and in this case, it's up true. The second fallacy that I would say, I will write documentation before, and again, I think we've been there, we've tried that, and we know this might work in really specific cases, edge cases, but normally if you try to write documentation about how the code should look like before you start writing the code, you will have your how do you say that? It's like a theory and the practice. And in the theory, there will be amazing things happening. In the practice, there will be a mess. But who cares? The theory is saying something different. So we have this documentation that's saying that this class is beautiful and have those properties, and this interface looks like this, and the communication between services looks like this. And then there is a practice saying that it's completely different. And again, this can be related to the unit testing. If not to mention TDD. TDD is a fine process, but I'm saying the writing unit tests before the code is written. If you will write 100 unit tests before the code is written, they are useless, honestly, because then you will be just writing the code to in the way that the unit test will pass, and that means that it will not be iterating process and it will not be improving process. You will just try to dump anything that you think of about the test and write those tests, and then execute something again, how to write the code that will pass those unit tests. Then it will not be green, red, or factor iteration process, which is the source of the TDD. Another one that I'm getting, and that's quite popular, is writing the documentation is waste of employee money. And I heard that many times with the unit tests. We don't need unit tests. You will waste only your money, my employee, my beloved employee. Please don't force us to write unit tests. That's not true. Actually, the opposite is true. If I will not have a documentation and I will not create it, then how much time do I spend reminding myself why the solution working the way it works? What were the decision 1 year ago that lead us to the place that we are here right now? How often do we ask to answer the question from the colleagues how this works, why this is working this way? Did you consider writing this differently? And then probably we did, but who knows? We don't have a documentation. What about the onboarding that was already mentioned? Again, someone needs to spend time and explain again and again the same things. But with documentation, we don't need to. What about maintaining and updating the application later on? Like in 2 years' time, we need to introduce a new feature. How to do it? Will anyone remember how this exactly works and why this works in the way that it works, and where we can inject something without breaking anything? And what about making the decisions, the educated decision about the source code? We will not be able to do it because about the solution, because we don't have a documentation. So we truly don't know exactly how it works and what it's doing in the proper manner. So another fallacy is documenting is a separate process. And by separate process, meaning that we're creating the code, and it's like the fallacy one. At the end, we've got this thing that will create the documentation, and there are amazing teams that can concentrate and cooperate with developers and create that documentation later on. But this is not always the best thing to do. And normally that means that whenever the developer is making a change, he needs to notify someone that the change has been made, and that someone will need to understand what was changed and create it. And it's just like writing unit tests on one machine and writing the code on the other machine. And whenever we would like to test, we need to pull the repository back on the different machine, execute the unit test, and then go back to the different machine and update the code. And then no, that doesn't work. Sorry. The fifth fallacy is it needs 100% coverage. So I still remember that, like, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, when Microsoft introduced the triple slash comments with the XML format, there was like a boom of having a documenting everything. So we were documenting the classes, documenting with the remarks, with everything. So we've tried to have a full coverage of code documentation in the code that will be living with the code and the changes that the code is making, and we know that doesn't work. Then we were trying to explain everything in the documentation, how this works, and all the relations about everything there. And it just doesn't work. It's like with the unit test, having 100% coverage is not good. It will cause us to write unnecessary document that it's unnecessary work for everybody, and it will not provide any value in the documentation at the end. At the end, when we will finish the whole process of writing documentation. And there is the one that I loved, soon I will tell you from where I know about this. It's the Agile Manifesto said it's not needed. And that's true, because Agile Manifesto said that working software over comprehensive documentation. And some of the people took it to the heart. And when I'm saying to the heart, that means the working software, the code is telling everything. The TDD, the unit test and the code are telling everything about the solution. We don't need to write the documentation. That's not true. That only means that do not exaggerate with the documentation. Don't go 100%. Just document what it's needed and what it's supposed to do, and don't concentrate on, don't spend extra time just to get that 100% of documentation in. And this thing, I honestly forgot about the manifesto and the comprehensive documentation, but this was remind me in the living documentation. And the living documentation is the way that may provide a solution to the problems that we described, to the fallacies that we have. And the living documentation was coined by the Shirley in his book, Living Documentation, and basically in many sessions, mainly in French, because that he presented about the living documentation. And what he did in this book, he described the whole idea of continuous knowledge sharing by combining those into the source code. And I think this is the thing that we are missing, because this is the maybe wrongly put it. This is the book that should be written ages ago, because what he did, he combined few of the good ideas from different people that were already doing into something and coined the term living documentation, so it will have some meaning. And he identified in this book like 4 principles of the living documentation. And the first principle is being reliable. So the documentation is in sync with the software. That means that whenever documentation change, the code change, the code changes, documentation change. So it's saying what the code is doing, and the code is saying exactly what's in the documentation. And this is a really important. Another one is low effort. That means we minimizing amount of work needed to create that documentation or to update and maintain that documentation. That's really important. As we know, developers don't like writing documentation. And if we will be asking them every time they write a class, please write documentation, they will not do it. So we need to minimize and think about minimizing the effort for creating that. The documentation should be collaborative. So it's not like I'm sitting down and writing everything, because someone needs to read it, can add, can comment, can ask the question for the clarification. And this is like a whole team working together on the solution. The whole team is working on the documentation as well. And meaning that whenever I've added something and it's not self-explanatory, then please update it and help make that information more clear, so it can be insightful and help us make a guided, educated decisions about next steps or what we do with the current solution and product. And if we will look like in short the principles in practice, so what it means basically, it means that we have evergreen documentation. Evergreen means that it's always up to date. It's never lacking behind. There is the documentation is generated from the metadata and the code. So so it's not something that is always written by us, but we can take out things that we created instead of replicating this in the words like we were doing this before, looking at the class and writing the document. We try to extract that information and put it into the document. And this is also the side effect of our work. So whenever we're working, we executing something, we're getting the feedback about inside of the documentation. And it's a synergy between testing and documentation. So the tests basically says are confirming the documentation is confirming the test. So when also the results of the test are the part of documentation. So as we said before, the tests are my documentation. That's still true, but in this case, we need to somehow provide and give that information out using the living documentation feature. And when we, as the engineers, we like tools. And we have lots of tools to help us create and maintain the living documentation. The idea of having those tools and being the engineer is that if we are missing some tools or we need to connect to tools, we can always spend time and write some code or create another tool based on the two different tools. However, there is one thing that we need to remember about, it's a balance. Even though we have a lot of tools and we can create a new one, we need to find a balance with what we will use and how we will use it. We still need to remember about this principle, low effort. And if there will be a lot of tools and a lot of possibilities, the developers and others will also drop the idea of creating and working with the documentation as it's too much to handle at once. So one of the most important tools in our build, and I would say in everything, and that we almost always forgetting about, it's not Word, it's not Google Doc, it's not Confluence page, it's not Wiki. It's just a plain simple text file that is a part of our solution and can be placed in the root or in the doc folder in our repository. It's that it contains a simple instructions or simple description about something related to our solution. That's the simplest possible tool that we have in the living documentation. We can, of course, in the plain text files use whatever markdown we like. It can be a syntax. We can be a markdown syntax. It can be ASCII doc syntax or whatever else we have in mind, as long as it's a plain text and it's readable by the human by just even not needed extra software to open. It can be even read on GitLab or GitHub page. This is simple, but yet powerful idea that it will be base for building a few other tools. So one thing important we should not be afraid. To mention is we should not be afraid to have those sort of files inside the repository and next to the code. They will live with the code, and they will be if they are in the code, they are the reminder of the things that we have. And if they are here, the developer might sometimes, just for the pure curiosity, open it up and see, yeah, it doesn't truly says the truth, I can fix it. If this file will be somewhere else, the developer will never do it. Once it's in the repository, the psychological aspect of it has changed how the developer sees this file, and it really helps to keep the files up to date. Really strange, but it does. And there is also a hidden benefit from the plain text file. It's full text search, but it's really simple and works almost everywhere. Not needed extra additional tool. So what are the tools that are built around the text files? One is a really important tool. It's called Architecture Decision Record, ADR, which was coined by Michael Nygaard almost 10 years ago, without a few months. It was 2011. He created a block that was in the shape of the architecture decision record. When he was describing the context of the problem and the decision why this kind of ADRs are helpful and what they can help with the documenting architecture significant change that are happening in our solution during the time of development. And the idea around is that it explains why we have why our system works the way it works. So it shows decisions and thinking process regarding why we are trying to shape the system in the way it's shaped, not how we did, because how it's the code. Why it's really important because it gives you the context and you can understand why some of the why the shape of the solution at the end is as it is. The idea is pretty simple. You just create a pure markdown or text file as close to the code as possible. So someone that is looking at the code may be able to also look at the ADR. Additional benefit when you're doing the pull request or pull review, honestly, if you have a change of the code and the ADR describing the change, you gain the context of how this change is made and why this change is made. Having this influence the better review process of your source code, giving you basically the bigger quality of the source code at the end and bigger quality of the application that you deliver. We will be tackling the template of the idea and what is the architecture decision change soon. But first, for who this idea is, because as we were talking about the documentation is always for someone, and if developer don't see the problem that is that we don't see for who this documentation is, then there's no point of creating this. And normally when we create documentation, we think it's for us, but it's not for us. Honestly, it's not for us at the current moment and current time. It's for the future us, to answer the questions why we have designed something the way that we design it. It's for our new teammates or new colleagues that will be during the onboarding process, that will be new hires, that will need to understand why the solution works the way that it works. It's for the current teammates to understand why we did the change why I did the change that I implemented. And it's also for the future and the current management, because they will sometimes want to know why the solution looks like it looks, sometimes, not always. As for the architecture significant change, when we're saying when to create the ADR, and basically if we are asking if this is worth creating ADR, that probably it is worth creating ADR. But if you are not, then this little guidance might help, that the architecture significant change is something that's related to the structure. So like patterns, data sharing, that we decided to go with the event-driven characteristics, or what we called the non-functional requirements of the system. So like the performance, scalability, transactions per second, dependencies, meaning the coupling, like how all the services talk to each other, or how our interfaces, how our endpoints changes, what are the schemas, what are the contracts, and what is the construction techniques. So what platforms and frameworks we're using. It's a protobuf, or this is a REST endpoint. Whenever these things change, or there is a change or decision regarding this, the ADR should be created. And this will lead, and this will give us a living documentation. And it's simple. You will see how simple it is in a second. It's really simple, and it gives us a powerful information about the code, and it lives with the code. And once it's created, it's there. It's not updated anymore. It's created, and it's a part of the code. And it's always the truth until it will be superseded by by the new decision. So it's like a true documentation about our code. So what the idea is, the idea consists of the 6 default sections, which is title of the decision that we are making, status, which is the information about if this is accepted, proposed, or superseded by. Accepted means that we good with this decision, we accept it, and we are implementing the decision. Proposed means that we still need to talk about this a bit, and superseded means that this decision has been replaced by the different one, and we are now linking to that different one decision here. This is the only way when we truly change after the idea is accepted. In the context, we're describing why we need to make the specific decision. What are the what is causing us to make the decision? What problem do we have, and what problem do we try to solve? And in the context, we can describe some of the solutions that we are looking at. But in the decision, we state clearly what solution we're choosing and why we are choosing. And this is the why is really important. Why we chose this solution over the others, or why we going this way. And in the consequences, we try to convince ourselves that this decision was good. So we are listing all the pros and the cons of the solution, all the trade-offs that we agree to take on. Like whenever you have async communication, the complexity of managing the exceptions in the process is it's getting more complicated than with the synchronous communication. However, with the async, you're gaining the responsiveness. And that responsiveness might be really important for the business. And in the consequence, we said that we agree that the responsiveness is more important than the complexity of error handling. And we can tackle the error handling with the asynchronous communication. And this is what the consequences are. And I like to add one more section. It's a compliance section. And it's really cool if you're looking at the perspective of how you want to validate that decision is executed properly. So you, in the compliance section, you're saying that I will create a special unit test, or I'm calling them convention testing, that will verify that this decision is in place. Like we will not be calling persistent layer from controllers, only by services. And now I need to write the test that will verify that the code is doing exactly this. And if the code will be broken, we will fix this. And also in the compliance, we can do the fitness testing. But on the
Jakub, we're not hearing you anymore. Still no.
Okay, sorry.
Now we can.
Bluetooth has hung on mic. I'm really sorry for that.
No worries.
Okay. Right. So going back. Oof. Right. It's my now nothing works. Okay. So Bluetooth hang. Too much. So okay. About the convention test. So as I said, that there is in compliance. There is convention testing, and convention testing means that basically we trust, but we check. So dowieraj, no provieraj. We verify that the developers are going the way that we like to go, but we need to make sure that they are going the same way that we wanted to go. So there is a tool called ArcUnit in Java world and ArcUnit.net in .NET world. That basically is the unit testing framework, which they call themselves architecture testing framework, which I call them convention testing framework. That's really complicated. But basically what they do, they're treating our code as the data. And we write tests around our data to verify that something is happening. And as I said before, we can create the idea that we said that the persistent layer can be only accessed through the service, but not from the controller. And we can easily do it with the ArcUnit by just defining layers that's saying that they are in the specific packages like controllers, services, persistence, and then verifying that that the specific thing does not cross the boundaries. So the controller can only call services, and the service can only call the persistent layer, and that's it. If this will be broken, so by accident developer will write the code that the controller is executing the persistent layer, the test will fail. And now we have a documentation saying that our code is not allowing this to happen. So the only service can call the persistent, and we have a test to verify this. So we are now sure that our documentation will be always up to date in this regarding this specific topic, because there is a test that will verify that if something is broken, it's broken and it will be from the exception. We can also do the other things, like we can verify that if something implements the connection interface, it ends with the connection with the suffix in the name. Okay, so we have the convention test, but we also have a fitness function. And I like to distinguish them too, because the convention testing is about testing internals of the code, how we're working, and the fitness testing is testing like the integrations. If we're looking at the some sort of, how do you say it? An example, in the test, in the fitness, you can test yourself if you can do 100 push-up, but that's the fitness function. But the test, if you move your finger, it's moving that particular muscle, it's a convention test. So you are verifying that this finger is connected to that particular thing, but that's not that your whole body can do 100 push-ups. So if you have the ADR saying that we need to support like 10 transactions per second, the fitness function is the way to execute it and verify it. So again, documentation, test, and we are having that information. And as I said, moving forward, the plain text is powerful. Now with that, we can have diagrams in the plain text, describe it in the human readable format. And that way that they can express, for instance, a sequence diagram. And when they're expressing the sequence diagram in the plain text, when we do the pull request and we are throwing that into the pull for the pull reviewer, they can easily see the change that we implemented and can do a verification if this is fine. But this is also the thing that will describe how our service might be used by someone else, or how we are using the different service that is in dependency from the IDR perspective. So if we have IDR saying that we're communicating, we decide to go with the communication with the specific service, we can also throw the text file with like in the Plant UML describing the sequence of the calls of the services, how they work and how they interact with each other. And then if we have this description, then the reviewer can see if this is actually true, or maybe something is wrong, the code is different than the documentation, and then these things works together perfectly in harmony. Of course, we can not only generate from the files a simple sequence, we can generate much more with the Plant UML, or we can go with the diagrams and Python and generate the infrastructure images. So we can describe how our code works on the infrastructure, what it needs to be executed, and then when needed, we can extract that information into the image. So the code is the thing that the developer will describe, that saying, okay, our code is using a web service and it's using a database. Boom, 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 boom. He wrote the little class and it's there. And now the manager is saying, I wonder how this works. And we can just, with one click, we can generate the image. And there's one source of truth, many destination and many people that can benefit from that information in more better and readable format that can also improve the pull request review process. These tools regarding creating the diagrams are many, and depending on what we need and what are the requirements, we can choose whatever we want, and we can then set the proper pull request pull review standards when we what we expect people to have in the pull request. But what it gives truly the information that with the simple plain text, we can easily and simple explain how our controllers works, how our code communicates with the different world and our outside world. This is something that each of the developers can do. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it lives in the code next to the solution. And it's a part of the ADR, it could be a part of the ADR as well. There are many other tools, of course, depending on what we need and how we are using them. We can take those tools and extract the information out from them, or add extra information to it by, like, I don't know, introducing extra process of injecting documentation in those tooling. But all of those tooling are producing, like, we were talking about the plain text files. We are talking about IDRs, about some convention and fitness function, about diagrams as text. But how this all together works? Yeah. So with those many tools, we need somehow a way of connecting them all together So at the end, we will have something that at the end we can call it living documentation. But to do it, we need to glue things together, glue those results with using some sort of the scripts or other functionalities or other tools or other steps that we can execute. And one of the things that we can use to do this is the .fx file that was docfx tool that was created by Microsoft a long time ago. And it's a tool that helps generate a static website with documentation about the code, about open API specification. It can display the diagrams and also add the loosely copulate files to it and create a static website that can, from the source code that we have, it glue everything together and expose this as the working documentation, living documentation of the things that we have in the code. As we are running a bit of time, let's move forward. But there's one important thing with the docfx file. It's providing a full text search of the things in the documentation. So if we have RDR, we can always search for it and it will display it. And it's straightforward. And it's finally, we can say something that it's on the intranet. It's easy because we can deploy it using a simple application hosting functionality. It's simple to create. We only need to define two or three extra files regarding the docfx files. The one is the top menu. The second one is regarding the menu inside the specific section, and then it will just generate whatever it needs to help us provide the documentation the way that we want. And to have this as an example, there is, where's my mouse? Yeah, okay. So we have a simple page. We have a documentation, but we have articles. Articles are custom written code by a custom written markdown files as us. So they can be the ADRs here, and we can go through it and we can see this is the this document was generated using only the markdown syntax. We can easily search for, I don't know, Microsoft, maybe it doesn't work, but let's see, tool. And then we've got a simple results with the search, full text possibility to search for it. So we can easily find the information that we want to find. What it adds extra is that it supports the open API specification. So if we got a Swagger JSON file, we can also render it here. So there is like a combining many tools together. And there is also API specification, which in case of Microsoft is the XML comments. In Java, this Java doc, probably we can feed it together, and it's creating the documentation that we can go and read through the documentation of the libraries, which is sometimes are important, sometimes are less important, but it's generated and it reflects the status of the code currently in the repository. It's not something completely out of space. It's something that is exactly what we have in the repository, and it's living documentation. Of course, we have a few alternatives, and depending what we need to do and what are the requirements, we can use a different tooling for that. We can use the structurizer, which is more advanced way of defining the C4 model of the architecture, and this will be living also with our source code and be generated then later into some sort of diagrams and documentation that we can click through the website. We can use a normal read the docs, so as Phoenix and MKey docs. So the tools to generate documentation based on some files. And then, of course, with the things that we will need to glue them together, we'll generate a working documentation the way that we want to use. Or we can use the frameworks that are provided, like the storyteller living documentation, which is the part of the specification functionality of the storyteller, and also the SpecFlow living doc, which is also the part of the specification testing framework in the SpecFlow, that you can create the documentation with the specification that you want to test your code with. And that's quite amazing. But also everything depends on what we need and what are the requirements and what tools that we are using in the code. Of course, at the end, we need to automate everything. And even though we have a docfx that will glue it together, it will not work perfectly. out of the box. We still need to somehow write the scripts that will take the result of the convention test output. We'll take the output of the fitness function test. It will take the output from the unit test and will create some sort of the markdown or X or something else, depending on the format that we would like to have it. Output that can be then use it to generate the static website with all of the documentation. And how hard can it be? I think this is the most challenging and difficult part of the whole process, but it's also the most rewarding. And if we have all the files that are living together with our source code and our solution, and all we need to do is to just find this script that will let us connect everything and have this amazing tool, which will calling the living documentation as code. And last 4 slides, I will try to finish it quickly. This is the one of the most boring one. Sorry for that, but that needs to be said. And I think the bullet points are the best way to describe this in this case. At the end, we will have the ADR that describing the application, how it, why it's designed the way it's designed. We will have convention and fitness testing to prove that the ADR are true. Unit tests and integration tests to verify that application is working the way it works. So they will also give feedback about the status and the document and will document our code in the way that we will know how it works. We'll have diagrams showing how the application can be deployed and how we can use it, or how the application is using the different dependent services. And we will have automated inspection and verification built in the process by using the convention test and the fitness that will make sure that the documentation is up to date, in the meaning that the rules are not broken when we make some decision. And additionally, depending on the tool, we might have also the code documentation and REST API documentation inside one of the portals. So we will have one big package with custom pages together delivered as the living documentation as code. So there will be one source of truth from which we can generate wherever we need and deploy it whenever and wherever we want. That leads us to happy developers, because they don't need to write the useless documentation that nobody is using. Happy management, because we have docs, and happy new hires, because they can finally understand what's going on, and happy architects, teammates, and team leads, because we have finally documentation that don't require a lot of our effort, and it's updated all the time. And almost a mic drop. Few words at the end that I would like to say. Before we will finish up, a few words about the Mambo, a company that a company that I'm working in. We are currently implementing this process that I was describing. We are currently choosing the best platform to display. I'm choosing, and the principals are helping to choose the best platform to display this information. And maybe we'll be just using the wiki page that's already there. But Mambo was launched in 2011 with the ambition to bring the banking technology into the digital age and make it accessible and flexible for any market opportunity. And we offer custom for the traditional banks and for the fintech startups a modern banking engine. And we currently supporting more than 33 million of end customers, meaning the users that are the banking users. We started with us in 2011, also like the idea 10 years ago, with 10 people only on board. Right now, there are more than 450, and we are in more than 10 locations. I'm the only one in Poland, Warsaw. So if you are interested, it's a really nice location. But the whole Mambo development team is located in Yash, where there is 150 Mambovian, and I think that 80% of engineering and development is happening up there. And at the last words about the Mambo, there is, if you are more interested in the Mambo, please go visit the Mambo virtual booth. In the section about us, there will be a small quiz with some voucher for you to win. There's 3 hours to answer the questions. from the presentation. They shouldn't be hard, but they might be a bit of challenging. For sure, it's worth checking out if the things that I said somehow in your head. So at the end, working with documentation, it's not easy, but with the few steps, we can make it fun, challenging task that requires the engineering skills that we have to process, to write the scripts, and so that we at the end we'll have automated way of creating the documentation that it's based from the code and the files that are in the source code, that we can treat it as the side effect of our development process, and that we can verify ourselves if we are not breaking anything that we decide to do, like we are not calling persistent layer from the controller layer. But this is not easy, and it's a try and error process. So I will go, at the end, what I can say, I can go try implement this by yourself in the organization. Share your thoughts and your experiments. Say what's working, what's not working. How did you solve the particular problems? Like how did you extracted the conventional fitness function output and put it into the documentation so it gives the proper feedback at the end of the day. I think the whole fun about this is the process, and the fun about creating this is having time to figure out this, and at the end everyone will benefit. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you, and sorry for extending a bit the presentation time.
Thank you as well, Jakub. There are some questions, but I will kindly ask you to go into the chat after this.
Okay, sorry for that. I'm really sorry. Yeah.
No worries. It's all good. It was a break. It's fine. We don't have time to take them live, but if you can answer in the chat, that would be awesome.